Hey friends, this is Marco from the Youth Cartel, and I'm here with my friend Dan Navarra. We've been working together for quite a few years. Most of you know this on the annual Youth Pastor Salary Report. Is that what we call it?
The National Youth Pastor Compensation Survey.
Yes, I always get the name wrong. That's good. Oh man, how many years have we been doing this again?
This is year eight. This is year eight. And the first one we did on accident, but this is year eight.
The first one was your brainchild, and you came to us
Yeah.
asking if we might help, particularly in getting the word out. And then I
Yeah.
kind of stepped in, playing a role of general editor of the
Yes.
report that you really came up. You're the guy who crunched the numbers and came up with the implications and stuff. And then we brought in other partners along the way. ChurchSalary.com has been a part of it for a number of years, which has been great because they have
Yep.
good insights into this kind of data. And then this year, for the first time, Download Youth Ministry is part of the family also, La
Yes.
Familia. Yeah.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask Dan a couple questions, and I hope you all have seen this report. It's free. We generate it every year. You can get it from the youthcartel.com and other places too. But Dan, what has surprised you in recent years as we've continued to see trends?
I would say one of the big surprises came a couple of years ago where the gender wage gap, which is something that we're committed to looking at every year, no matter what your theological affiliations are. The big one was it normally hovers in the like 12 to 14% category where men make 12 to 14% more than women with equal qualifications. And a couple of years ago, it jumped up to like over 18%. And I thought, whoa, uh-oh. And this was during COVID, and I thought that's like a red light. And then last year it normalized back to 12%, basically. And the way that it did that was really interesting. Women saw like a 7% uh, average salary raise over the year prior, whereas the male number stayed pretty much consistent last year.
Yeah,
Um, and so we saw across the board a 2% annual average increase last year, but it was 100% attributed to the average female salary
yeah,
rising significantly more than any other year. So, really interesting. I'm really excited to see kind of what happens this year as we kind of are more into what I would call the post-normal pandemic, to see what happens with those trends this year. So that's
yeah,
definitely a trend that we pay attention to every year.
yeah. And what other one or two other trends have you been pleased to see?
Yeah, pleased to see. I think first of all, the every year we receive messages from people saying this PDF got me a raise, or some version of that. They use it when they go to their supervisors and it gives them something to start the conversation with,
Yeah,
where it really favors the youth worker. And I love that trend continues it's one of the reasons why this matters so much to me because I think a lot of youth pastors have been in youth ministry less years than the surveys existed, and it's a part of their rhythm now every year to go take the survey to their bosses and talk about compensation. We like that a lot.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
What has frustrated you?
The raises that happen every year, because we've never had a year where the survey results stay the same or go down. There's always an increase, but the increase is never enough. It is being dwarfed, especially the last several years, by inflation. And I would say the other thing that frustrates me the most is youth workers who don't understand how they are being compensated. Am
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
am I legally considered clergy and I get a housing allowance, or am I not? I'm the equivalent of working at, Home Depot or whatever, even though I speak messages and baptize kids and do all the minister things, I'm still viewed as a what's considered a W-2 employee, like a janitor or a secretary. Youth workers who don't know that. And then the other one that frustrates me, we've learned over the years that if you don't know your church's attendance and budget numbers, you're
yeah,
typically paid less than people who do.
yeah,
And so there's like a few like really low-hanging pieces of fruit that can help people like know why they're being paid poorly.
yeah.
those lines never leave the report. They're
Yeah.
repeated every year.
Yeah, that's been really fascinating for me to see for sure. Okay,
Yes,
I want to ask you one more question. I gave you a
sure.
heads up on this that I was going to ask this, and actually, even before I thought I'd ask it here today, I just asked you about it because of my own curiosity. I keep hearing in the last couple of weeks about this new national, I want to call it a national minimum wage. I don't know if that's what it's called. That is for exempt or salaried employees, and the I can't remember the number, but it's higher than our average. It's
Yeah,
higher than the average youth pastor salary reported in our survey. I want to say that it's in the high 50s and we're in the low 50s, if I remember right, something like that. Don't hold me to that.
sure.
Churches notoriously think they're exempt from employment law. And we are, I will be very clear to everybody listening. Dan and I are not legal advisors.
No.
Do not take this as legal advice. But what is your sense of how that is going to play out for people?
Yeah. My understanding is there's three things at work here. The first two are more on the legal side. The third one's on the ethical side. Okay. So the first piece of this is how are you legally classified?
Mm-hmm.
Your church has to obey, even though it's a religious nonprofit, it has to obey federal and state wage laws on non-ministerial employees. So the
Mm-hmm.
church secretary has to be paid minimum wage. They are not a minister or a pastor. They are not licensed, commissioned, or ordained. Those are the legal words the IRS uses. If it and there's many youth directors, I use that phrase
Uh-huh.
because it's the common
Yep.
nomenclature, who are not licensed, commissioned, or
Right.
ordained. Kids
Right.
directors, youth directors, even some worship people. So some denominations, especially, they're like I would say with prejudice. You are not ordained. You do not get the benefits. That's fine. So if you are a W-2 employee that does not receive a housing allowance, you are not offered a housing allowance. You are an employee of an organization. Doesn't matter if it's a
Mm-hmm.
religious nonprofit or not, and you are required to be paid your state and federal minimums, which
Yes.
includes overtime compensation if you're an
Right.
hourly employee. And it's just like working at Target. You're entitled to breaks, meals, paid overtime. Like it's hard to be a youth worker and be an hourly employee. I
Yeah.
predicted 5 years ago that the number of hourly employees was going to grow. I've been wrong about that so far, but I think it's still coming as wage increases continue to grow. So that's one piece. The second part is if you are a minister, you're technically, even though you still get a W-2, you have dual status with the IRS, my understanding. And that dual status technically makes you unemployed. Like a plumber or a
Yeah.
contractor who
Yeah.
owns their own business, you can bill whatever you want. Now, that's not really what happens at churches. They offer you a salary versus like, I own my business. I'm going to tell you what I owe. But if you're self-employed, you are exempt from state and federal minimum wage requirements because you are your own employer. Okay.
Yeah.
And that means if you're ordained, licensed, or commissioned, they can pay you $5 a month and it's legal because you're agreeing to it,
Right.
right? They could also pay you $5 million a month and it's legal because
Yeah.
you're agreeing to it, right? It's just billing. So that's the really important thing for employees to understand. I got into youth ministry. I didn't understand. I really didn't.
Right. Right.
Um, and then, so then the third part of that I said was like those are the two legal pieces. The third part is the ethical piece, and we're really dealing with this in California, where the salary minimum is much higher. It's like
Right.
66,000, and there's many youth workers not making 66,000 in
Right.
California. Should your church, just because they can, because you're a minister, should they pay you less than the salary required minimum for any other occupation, including your church's maintenance supervisor or secretary? Any other salaried employee in the state has to make this number at
Right.
66,400 or something. Should they pay you less because they're legally allowed to? I would say no, but
Uh-huh.
so there's that kind of weird piece as well that
Yeah.
some churches are giving cost of living raises to employees that they're required to, and they're not raising their ministers' salaries as well.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you have to know how you're classified and know how to address it
Yeah.
properly. And every
Yeah.
state is different, and then there's federal minimums.
Right. One of my peeves here in California is how many churches think that because the vast majority of youth workers that I interact with are employees and are not licensed, ordained, or
Yes.
commissioned.
Yes.
Um, and churches wrongly
Yeah.
assume that they are exempt from, I don't mean exempt like an exempt employee, they are exempt from employment law. And
Yeah.
they are not, at least here in California, they are not. Even
So
things like you're not allowed to volunteer for an organization that you are paid a full time pay for.
yep.
And so many churches think those rules don't apply, and they do apply. And whether or not the Employment Commission would ever pursue, or the IRS would ever pursue a church, is a separate issue. Morally, it's just wrong for a
Yeah.
church to not be responsible with those laws.
I actually years ago wanted to get clarity on this, and so I wrote to the labor board and got a ruling on the labor board that has now been listed in several different lawsuits. Not from Christian churches. Some other religions found out that I had gotten this ruling from the labor board and asked me for my response, and it was listed in case data. The way that this blows up, unfortunately, is a class action lawsuit at some point down the road where people realize they've been paid improperly, and it could be catastrophic for the capital C church. If you're an executive pastor or senior pastor who hears about this, I really encourage you to talk to a tax professional about your church's payroll, because most executive pastors aren't HR whizzes.
Right.
But there's some great ministries out there that will help you be compliant, and I highly recommend that
Yeah.
investment is worth it.
Great. Okay. The reason why Dan and I got on Zoom today to record this for you guys is certainly about a little primer of some of the stuff that we've been seeing, but it's also because we're in the final weeks of collecting data for the 2025 report, and
Yes.
that will come out in January. And is it December 1? Is that our deadline?
November 30th, right?
November
We got
30th.
about a month left of collecting data. We do, and
So
yeah.
please, whether you've ever taken this in the past or not, if you haven't yet filled out the survey this year, please take 5 minutes. It does not take a lot of time. Please take a few minutes, and we'll post a link
Yep.
along with this to the survey. Take 5 minutes. If you are an employed youth worker, ideally, what we're really shooting for is those who are full-time. We do have some data from part-time people too. If you're a volunteer youth worker, God bless you. That's
God
not what this
bless you.
survey. That's not what this survey is about. So please click through on the link that we'll provide and take the survey so that we can continue to offer you this helpful free resource.
And I'll also say in closing, I offer this to anybody who ever wants to know. If you have a group of like a youth pastors network you're a part of locally with 3 or 4 other or more youth pastors, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call and do a tailored conversation for your geography anytime. So send me an email, dan.navarra@chemistrystaffing.com, and we can get that set up.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.